people in that, or a couple hundred people in that room. So, I mean, I think there are certain things where we just have a lot of collective consensus where, and where we do have serious disagreements over strategy. And that's especially been tough to deal with during COVID because we don't have the normal mechanisms for sorting that out, right? Except for like our chapter forum and things like that, where things can get pretty heated. But yeah, I just don't think, I think that people don't necessarily see their disagreements, like almost all of our disagreements, when they don't get personal, and they do get personal from time to time. Of course it does, right? You just can't avoid that. But they're very, I think our disagreements have been very strategic and not that ideological, but like, I don't necessarily know, like, I guess like if a caucus were, I'm kind of rambling a little bit, but I mean, the thing is like caucuses arise out of also differences in strategy, but I also think that there has to be like, the caucuses nationally, like they also articulate some differences in ideology, right? And maybe it's just that because our, like, we have differences in ideology, but we mostly just like argue over the finer points of strategy. I don't really know. I mean, I'm kind of spitballing as to why we don't have that, but we just don't, we never have. And like, I mean, I'm just my personal opinion. Like I mean, I love Red Star, but like, you know, they do like political education, reading groups, etc. They're not whipping votes for stuff. There'll be stuff that most of their members agree on or like want to pass, but they don't really officially whip votes as a caucus. They don't do that. So yeah, I don't know why we don't have that, but I'm kind of, it's kind of nice. I think it is, personally. No offense to any caucus havers here. There's a place for that. And I know there's other chapters that do have caucuses, and they, you know, sometimes it goes well, sometimes it doesn't, but we just don't have it.
Thanks, Shanti. Jason, can you talk a little bit about the caucus dynamics in Central Connecticut?
Sure. So like many things in Central Connecticut, it's much different now than it was a year ago. If you asked me like a year ago, like what internal politics was like, because I wouldn't even call it caucus politics. Like we have Brendan Roses here in Connecticut. I don't know if people know Alec Ramsey-Smith. He's a lovely person, now a DSA staffer from Chicago. He was on the steering committee. I know some people who are Brendan Roses in Central Connecticut. They run Yale YDSA, of course. And it wasn't really any like caucus politics beyond like there was a group in the leadership and there was all their friends, people they could pull into a meeting. And then there were other people who occasionally organized into opposition group or didn't. Like sometimes like that did happen. Like we did have like an opposition group Discord for a while that never really fermented into a locals caucus. But again, like once COVID happened, our chapter was shaken up. Like the entire leadership resigned. Like they all had to go back to work, basically. And if I had to say like what the real division was before that, it was on like turf over other organizations, like between unions and nonprofits and community organizations who hated the shit out of each other, like would not exist in the same room. So they decided like, oh, we're in this DSA chapter, we can't organize in the city, so don't bother, because they're like members of a other organization that hated another organization in that city. So what happened after COVID though, like it all sort of broke down because we can just talk about our political disagreements. Like we could just talk about it on Slack or in a meeting. I think like electoral is a big one in our chapter because we have some people who are successful, like have been in like Justin Farmer, people might have heard about him, and he had a Jack article interview or whatever. He's a great guy now on our New Haven steering committee, Greater New Haven steering committee, who like he's really big on like elections and stuff. And I hate elections personally, but like we can agree on like there are smart ways to run elections where you like think about it long term and like have goals beyond just winning a seat. And then there are people who want to run a vanity campaign or want to just run because they want to run. And that's not anything against anybody who wants to, you know, run for office. You know, God bless you. But I think like there's been a really deep conversations in my chapter that have been built up just because we've needed to reorganize and talk to all our members about like, what is democratic socialism to you? What do you want like the work to be? Again, another New Haven steering committee member, Mark Furla, Unite Here organizer too. A shout out to them. He said like he wants democratic socialism to mean like what is the thing you're doing to like change the world, like to contribute to the movement. If it's just like coming to meetings, arguing about things, and like not getting anything done, it becomes like, I don't want to be a democratic socialist. If it's about like, oh, I'm participating in this struggle with other people, my voice matters because I contribute to decision making and strategy and everything, that is meaningful for a lot of people, I think. And much different of a conversation to have like when there's no caucuses now. Like I could name like people who are in national caucuses probably, but none of them have influence in the chapter, I don't think. Like, again, I think somebody said it earlier, if you said, Austin, I think like, yeah, if you told anybody in my chapter about like bread and roses, and let's say we're a real like wonk, they would not care or no, which I think is a liberating experience because we're working on something very local and trying to build it, local as Connecticut could be. We got 3 million people over however many miles, but yeah, that's where we're at.
All right. Thank you everyone for answering the question about the caucuses. So floor is now open for audience questions. So if anyone has any questions, just drop it into the chat, and I will call on someone who can then ask their question to the panelists. Right, Zoom chat is open. All right, Aisha, would you like to ask your question?
Sure, sorry for like jumping the line. Yeah, I just would really love to hear from people about how chapters can encourage members to run for steering committee. My chapter, like last year, only one new person ran. It was like all the same people, and I've been on the steering committee for 3 years, and I like identified people who I thought should run and asked them to, and told them why I thought it was a good idea for them to do it. I tried to talk about how it doesn't have to be as much work as it might look like sometimes, but it's really hard.
Thank you, Aisha. I will start with Jason. Would you like to start answering that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when my chapter, again, we had 6 at-large steering committee seats that all resigned at the beginning of COVID, along with every other branch rep besides the 2 from my branch, Bridgeport. And a lot of it was just like talking to people. Some people did step up, thank God. Like my comrades Victoria, Alex Cocatronis, other people who stepped up immediately. A lot of it was like intentional recruitment, just to say like, we need people who are willing to do the work of organizing the chapter. I think removing like the element of it being like the political leadership helped a lot because we were mainly asking people for help. Like we needed people to like, because now I do a lot of it still, but it's in different capacities. Answering emails, like calling people, setting up meetings, setting agendas, setting up Action Network events, a lot of like really basic things that needed to be done. But we can't now realizing like that was a lot to ask of people. And like, that's a lot of work. I do a lot of stuff and I'm unemployed. I get paid by the, federal government. Biden pays my checks to do DSA work officially. And like, that's unsustainable for somebody with a job, like, and kids and a lot of other responsibilities. If the work isn't defined, like if there aren't clear roles being asked of people, like right now I've asked, like, I need the secretary role because in 3 to 6 months or however long, or if I run for another term of steering committee a year, like if I left, who would know what I do? Like I need to like have that written down so I could tell somebody this is what the responsibilities are. And as we build the organization, like I tell this to people who run a branch, like you need to set up your email, you need to set up your this and that, your spreadsheets, your color coding, etc. To make sure that like it can run and you can hand it to somebody else and they could take that and rebuild it and reuse it and ideally just keep going. I think that's really hard. It's a long conversation, but it's the same type of one-on-one leadership development we're doing anyway. I think we just need to accept that like organizing organizers is part of what being in an organization means, and that's okay to do sometimes.
Thanks, Jason. Austin, as someone from a similarly sized chapter, can you also talk a little bit on this?
Sure, yeah. So kind of going to some of the points that Jason was making, I think leadership development is crucial. Always being prepared to train our replacements, right? But I do sympathize with some of the difficulties you've described, Aisha, because fundamentally, I think this conversation is somewhat tied into the conversation of how do we engage paper members, which is life is hard. Capitalism's a motherfucker, like it's hard to fault anybody for either one, not wanting to get into leadership, or two, just not having the time to be properly engaged, right? So I think those are issues that are almost inherent to our organization, so to speak, or inherent to the life of the organizer, as Jason was talking about. I do think as far as things we've done in Richmond to try and combat that, because once again, these are sort of things that we deal with here as well. For a while, we had talked about potentially experimenting with some sort of like understudy model, like an under treasurer person. Like there's the treasurer and then there's the under treasurer person who's kind of likes to preserve some sort of institutional continuity. Right now, what I'm really excited or really interested to see how this works. The Richmond chapter is in the midst of doing a bit of a bylaws overhaul. And part of that bylaws overhaul is introducing staggered terms within the steering committee. So what I mean by that is rather than getting elected on a yearly basis, you'd get elected on a 6-month basis, half of the steering committee, that is. That's what we're building toward. So that one, you're preserving institutional continuity with the people who are remaining for 6 months. And at the same time, we hope that it'll appear less daunting to people, right? It's just a 6-month term. If life changes, we get it. Capitalism is a motherfucker, right? Which I'm sorry, I've dropped like 10 F-bombs already. I hope that's okay. So we get it. Introducing these staggered terms, we hope can resolve some of that as well. But fundamentally, it's about always leadership development, preparing for our own replacements, which it's definitely tough. It's definitely a very important question that we need to be asking ourselves.